Did you know that a low-fat diet is vastly better for diabetes health than a high-fat diet like the ketogenic diet? As it turns out, high-fat diets are actually a ticking time bomb. Despite excellent short-term results, they can be disastrous in the long term. It's low-fat diets in general that are actually high in whole carbohydrates that have actually been proven in the scientific research to lower your blood glucose and your blood pressure and your cholesterol, both in the short term and in the long term, and improve many other biomarkers at the same time. So in this two-part video, this is the second of two, you will learn how to pick the right kind of low-fat diet for diabetes. You'll learn exactly which foods to pick and which foods to avoid. And we're going to answer some frequently asked questions about low-fat diets that we get all the time. Now, when it comes to diabetes, choosing the right diet can be very important and it can completely change your life. So make sure you watch part one and then let's get right into this video. Hey, I'm Cyrus Khambatta. I've been living with type 1 diabetes since 2002. My co-founder, Robbie Barbero, and I have been coaching people to manage type 1 and type 1.5 diabetes and reverse insulin resistance, which is the underlying condition that causes prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes, using a simple, easy to understand, and very effective low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. It's actually a secret to optimal diabetes health that, for whatever reason, most people don't know anything about. The question is, are you ready to master diabetes? So let's get right into the meat of the topic, pun intended. How do you pick the right type of low-fat diet for diabetes? Because all low-fat diets are not created equal. Well, fortunately, we've spent more than 2 decades perfecting a diet that hits all of the key points of an ideal low-fat diet. Now, a low-constructed low-fat diet must fulfill the following criteria. There are 4 main points. Number 1, it has to contain carbohydrate-rich foods that are minimally processed or completely unprocessed, such as fruits, starchy vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. Number 2, it does not contain any refined carbohydrate-rich foods like crackers or chips or pastas or sodas or cookies or brownies or pastries. Even though they taste good, they're not good for your overall health. Number 3, it contains no more than 15% of total calories as fat. Number 4, it contains 0, that's right, 0 oils, including but not limited to olive oil, coconut oil, canola oil, or trendy oils like avocado oil. Now, there are a few characteristics of this diet that are very important to understand. The first is that this diet is extremely high in plants. Now, there's a huge emphasis that we put on plant-based eating. Now, low-fat diets often have a bad reputation for being boring, but the truth is that they don't need to be. In fact, low-fat does not mean low flavor. In fact, our recommended diet includes a wide selection of vegetables and fruit at every meal. And we also put a huge emphasis on whole grains like intact barley or quinoa or even legumes like lentils, beans, and peas. And it also doesn't mean that you can't have fun either if you choose to eat a plant-based diet. You may not have known it, but there are some pretty amazing plant-based fat-free salad dressings that you can buy in the grocery store, as well as spices that can really change the personality of your dish. And there's a very simple way that you can use very easy cooking techniques to put an incredible kick into your food that take it to the next level. Now, if you're like a lot of people who are thinking, well, there's no way to make eating a plant-based diet that fun, then you might actually be surprised. Click the subscription button and turn on the notifications because we are going to be showing you a lot of really innovative ways to make very tasty and filling comfort-based meals that you might be pretty surprised can be very tasty. The next thing that's very important is to choose whole foods at all times. Whole foods matter. A whole food is a food that is minimally processed or completely unprocessed and is as close to what it is found in nature. For example, a whole grain like barley would be considered whole, and it hasn't been processed to remove all the things like the germ and the bran that are extremely rich in fiber and micronutrients. Similarly, for fruits and vegetables, they're fresh foods that haven't been processed in any way, and they don't need to be heat treated or blended in order to eat them whole. The next aspect that's important is that whole grains are actually your friend. There's a lot of propaganda that tells you that whole grains are bad for you, that you should avoid them because they're going to cause an insulin spike and a blood glucose spike. And when that happens, that's going to cause your blood glucose to go high. But the truth is that that only happens when you already have a baseline level of insulin resistance. When you are in the process of reversing insulin resistance, then your ability to eat whole grains goes up, and it goes up significantly. Now, whole grains are not the boogeymen that you might believe that they are. In fact, they're a great place to get the nutrients and a significant increase in fiber, which is very important because most Americans actually are fiber insufficient. And if you're trying to increase your fiber intake, then whole grains are a very simple place that you can get them from. Now, you have to make sure that they are as whole as possible, otherwise known as AWAP, okay? And we want to make sure that they're not refined or processed into flour first and then reconstituted into baked products. Now, low-fat diets encourage whole grain choices like barley and brown rice and quinoa and amaranth and whole wheat. We are huge fans of all of those, and evidence-based research demonstrates that people who put more of these whole grains into their diet actually have a lower incidence and a lower prevalence of diabetes. Another thing to take into consideration is that convenience foods, no matter how tasty they are actually not good for you. I know that may sound like a little bit of a stretch, but hear me out, okay? We recommend avoiding processed convenience foods as much as possible. Things like artificial sweeteners like aspartame or hydrogenated vegetable oils that you find in products like margarine. These are dietary napalm, okay? Do your best to minimize your intake of anything that comes in a package, a bottle, a can, and do your best to eat as much unpackaged food as possible and buy as much as you can from the produce section or from the bulk section because that's where whole food lives. Now, it's a good guess that brightly colored packaged foods, even if they scream the word low fat and even have the words low fat printed on them, may not be the optimal decision because, again, they come in a package, which means they were likely processed before they got to the grocery store. Another thing to take into account is that you shouldn't fear fruits. Now, fruits are another boogeyman for people living with diabetes because marketing all over the internet and all over social media says don't eat fruit. If you eat fruit, fruit equals sugar. Sugar causes a blood sugar spike. Sugar causes an insulin spike, and that's going to make you more diabetic. I'm sure you've seen it before. Trust me, I've seen it all over the place, and it is everywhere. Again, just like the whole grain argument, fruit is a boogeyman if you already are living with a heightened state of insulin resistance. As you reverse the insulin resistance process and become very insulin sensitive, your tolerance for carbohydrates, and especially for fruit carbohydrate, goes up. And that's a good thing, okay? We strongly encourage that you eat fruit and you eat a significant amount of it on a daily basis because fruit is extremely micronutrient dense, and that's a good thing for you. Now, low fat doesn't mean low carb. And I know that may sound like a very simplistic thing to say, but there's a very large distinction here. The lower the fat content, generally speaking, the higher the carbohydrate content. And especially if that comes from whole carbohydrates, then you're putting yourself in the right position for long-term success. Now, as you read about in our book in detail, we talk about the health of your muscles, the health of your liver, and the health of your brain, and how important it is to maintain the function of these organs over the course of time. And that these three organs rely on an available supply 24/7 of glucose, and glucose comes mainly from carbohydrate energy. So when you're consuming fruits, you get increased fiber content, which is awesome. You get an increased micronutrient content, which is fantastic. You get an increased glucose content, which is fantastic. Again, if your level of insulin resistance is coming down or is already low. And in addition to that, you also have a significant increase in your phytochemical intake, which is very good because phytochemicals are these little plant materials that are very effective at reversing disease processes in many tissues. Now, I'm going to say this one more time. I sound like a broken record, but if you already are living with a high level of insulin resistance, then eating fruit is not going to be possible. I know it myself, and we've coached thousands of people through this. You have to become less insulin resistant over the course of weeks to months. And when you do that, you earn the ability to eat more fruit. And when you earn the ability to eat more fruit, you're getting a larger glucose load and your blood glucose stays nice and stable. That's the trick. Now, we all know that meats can be hard to give up for a lot of people. And we recommend avoiding or at least significantly reducing your consumption of all meats. Now, meats tend to range from, the type that are not ideal for you, even meats like chicken and turkey breasts, to known carcinogens that are class 1A carcinogens, like processed meats containing nitrites and heme iron and preservatives and cholesterol and a large amount of saturated fat. The one area of meat that has shown some possible benefits for insulin resistance is actually not meat per se, but it comes from fatty fish, which are eaten in the traditional Mediterranean and Japanese diets. But much of the research isn't very clear as to whether or not they're truly beneficial. So we don't necessarily include them in our dietary recommendations. We also suggest avoiding as much dairy as possible. Most cream, dairy, and cheese products contain significant quantities of saturated fat, and that can increase your risk for heart disease, for obesity, for type 2 diabetes, for chronic kidney disease, and for fatty liver disease simultaneously. The fact is that dairy products do raise insulin levels because, again, the saturated fat is what accumulates inside of your liver and muscle, and that over the course of time makes insulin action in both of those tissues low, which then causes a backup traffic jam and causes glucose to pool inside of your blood. Low-fat diets that we recommend encourage avoiding or significantly reducing your intake of high-fat dairy foods in particular, like ice cream and butter, and even low-fat dairy foods like cottage cheese or skim milk. If you want to learn more about the danger of eating dairy products, we have another video on that, which I highly recommend watching, because that will give you a little bit more insight into the actual research connection between dairy and the prevalence of insulin resistance and many forms of diabetes. Now, when it comes to eggs, the common staple that we recommend avoiding that's pervasive in the American diet is the handy dandy happy egg. Now, egg yolks are high in cholesterol and saturated fat, and both of those increase your risk for a higher LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. And that in turn increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. Now, there's meta-analyses that demonstrate in over 1 million people that a higher LDL concentration does in fact increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. This is not up for debate. No matter how widely debated this is in the general public, from the scientific perspective, it's not debated. Our version of a low-fat diet significantly reduces or eliminates eggs altogether. One of the reasons is because they are high in cholesterol, but another reason is because they're also high in saturated fat. And a little tidbit for you, saturated fat actually is the most influential nutrient in your food that can raise your cholesterol levels, more so than cholesterol itself. Now, do us a favor. I know there's a lot of information here. Leave us a comment if what we're saying scares you, if you don't like it, if you love it. You tell us what you think. I know it can be hard to try and pull off what we're suggesting here by limiting your intake of eggs and dairy products and meat at the same time. And the truth is that it doesn't have to be something that you do overnight, but something that you can do over the course of time. We actually recommend people slowly transition their diet to a more plant-strong diet, because that way you can avoid rapid changes in your blood glucose, which is a good thing because it'll teach you what's cause and what's effect. And it'll prevent you from going to the hospital in case you get a very low blood glucose. People ask us all the time, they say, hey, can I go entirely fat-free? Because I don't want to eat any fat. And the answer is, well, no, you can't actually do that, because we recommend eating a low-fat diet because you can't actually eat a zero-fat diet. The only way you would get away with eating a zero-fat diet is if you drank something like water and had honey, but we don't recommend doing that at all. All foods, even foods that come from the whole food plant-based world, such as fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains, every single one of them contains a small amount of fat. So don't be afraid of fat. That's not the point. The point is just to try and keep your fat intake low, less than 15% of total calories, and try and minimize your intake of saturated fat. And when you do that, all of a sudden, insulin sensitivity becomes very doable. What if I fall off the wagon? People ask me this all the time. People, if you're eating a low-fat diet and you find that your health is improving dramatically, then pat yourself on the back. And if you find that you're falling off the wagon because it's hard to integrate into your lifestyle, or maybe you went to a social situation and you decided to eat whatever was in front of you, it's okay. Just get back on track and keep going. You're not likely going to erase all of your progress with one single meal or maybe one weekend of eating improperly. But even if you do set yourself back, just go back to eating a low-fat diet the exact same way that you were doing before. It's not a big deal. And I don't want you to turn this into a large emotional disaster, because you're human after all. I get it. And changing your diet can be a dangerous, or it can be a challenging thing to do. So that's why we recommend doing it slowly. The last thing I'll say is that people often ask us, what about meat substitutes? Because there's a lot of them in the grocery store today. And we recommend this. If you're sticking to fresh plant-based whole foods like jackfruit or durian, which you can prepare in ways that make it look and smell and taste and feel like meat, then go for it. Do it all day long. It's totally fine. But there's a lot of plant-based choices in the market that can be a little bit more processed. You can get these Impossible burgers, you can get other plant-based burgers and plant-based chicken nuggets and beyond. Those tend to be relatively highly processed, and they sometimes contain ingredients and additives that you wouldn't find if you were eating just a whole food. So we recommend, again, trying to stay away from the freezer section that has a bunch of packages, and instead going for the whole fruit and then turning that whole fruit into something that might have a meat-like texture. It's pretty simple. Now, Mastering Diabetes isn't just a collection of research, okay? We have an entire community which we've hand-built from the ground up, and we utilize these same strategies that I'm telling you here to help people reverse insulin resistance, which in turn helps them reverse prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, and manage type 1 and 1.5 diabetes brilliantly. Okay, if you are interested in taking full control of your diabetes health and mastering it once and for all, then we suggest booking a free discovery call. On that discovery call, you're going to talk to a real human being who's going to learn more about you and see if you're a good fit for our coaching program. And then we can give you a guaranteed step-by-step system with full accountability to get you from point A to point B so that you can look and feel your best without any questions. If you want to learn more about it, simply go to www.masteringdiabetes.org www.keto.com/start. If you do that, you can get directly in, book a time to speak with one of our team members, and we'll do everything we can to possibly help you out. In the meantime, hit the like button. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you in the next video.